What's up everybody? As I'm sure many of you have noticed recently, there seems to be more and more talk about Overwatch getting a forced role lock system added in potentially the very near future. There's already been leaks stating that a 2-2-2 role lock will be coming to the Overwatch League, so it reasons that this same change will follow into standard Overwatch competitive matches, and probably even quick play as well. But what will it really mean for us as players if a forced role lock gets introduced? How will it change the game? And is it even really the right step towards making Overwatch a more balanced and enjoyable gaming experience? This is Master Ian Gamer, and let's get into it. Now, real quick, for those of you who may not be familiar with the idea of a role lock, it's basically a system where players queue to play specific roles, being DPS, tank, and support, and then can only pick heroes from those categories in order to limit the kinds and number of team compositions possible. The role lock I'm going to be talking about today is 2-2-2, or 2 DPS, 2 tanks, and 2 supports. This is commonly seen as being the most balanced team format, and is what's expected to be hitting the Overwatch League as well as competitive in the near future. Now, as with many things, the best way to evaluate the impact of a change like this is to look at the pros and cons. Starting with the benefits of a role lock system, the most immediate and commonly discussed one is the fact that it forces an at least somewhat viable team comp in all matches. A system like this would obviously make it impossible to have 6 insta-locking DPS, as players would be unable to pick any heroes outside of their specific category. This would of course rule out many viable team comps, such as triple tank, triple support, but the fact that it'd prevent any well-intentioned tank or support player from wasting their time with a team of 5 dirt tier DPS players means most people would consider it a fair trade-off. Additionally, by having separate roles you can queue into, the game can actually track your skill rating for each role separately. For example, if you're a really good tank player and you queue in as a tank, you would get placed into a Masters match or whatever matches your MMR for tank heroes. Say you then wanted to play a DPS, but you're only mediocre at damage. In that case, then the game would track your skill as DPS and match you into gold or platinum to better suit your skills as a damage dealer. This would largely remove the need for players to make separate accounts for playing different roles, as any skill gaps a player has will be accounted for in a multi-role queue system. Granted, this sort of change would then require a pretty heavy overhaul of the existing competitive system, but in all honesty, I think we kinda need that anyways. And adding in a forced role lock like this is really a great reason to go ahead with a massive competitive overhaul. Next, I want to focus on the second major benefit to a forced system like this, which is that it actually makes the game much easier to balance. This is one aspect which I don't see people addressing nearly as much as the functional team comp facet, but I would argue that it's actually way more impactful and important. As it stands, every hero has to be balanced to work in team comps consisting of any possible combination of other heroes. In fact, if you calculate it out, with 30 heroes, there are 593,775 different possible combinations for a 6-hero team. Wowzers. However, that big number doesn't really matter that much. It more so comes down to situations where specific hero abilities or mechanics prove problematic in combination with other specific abilities or mechanics. A great in-game example of this is Brigitte, a hero who's pretty garbage in a 2-2-2 composition, but excels in Goat's comp where you have a lot of closely grouped high health tank heroes. If 2-2-2 became forced through role lock, Blizzard could safely and more easily balance Brig so that she works in a 2-2-2 without worrying about it overpowering triple tank, triple support again. For those of you who've been playing Overwatch since the start, you likely remember a time where there wasn't even a hero limit. You could run 6 Winstons if you wanted, and the game was kind of a mess because of it. By implementing a hero limit of 1 per team, Blizzard was able to steer the game into an easier to balance state. Adding a 2-2-2 role lock would be taking another step in the same direction. It reduces the number of possible team compositions, but this more limited environment makes it easier to balance heroes since there there is less room for crazy atypical comps which abuse gameplay mechanics. However, looking now at the downsides to roll lock, this is where the cracks in the system become evident. First up is the fact that if you're a DPS player, you're going to see an insane spike in queue times. Now, this one is a bit of a double-edged sword in that the queue times for tank and support players will significantly drop by comparison, but that doesn't change the fact that DPS players could regularly face queue times as long as 20 minutes, as speculated by Jeff Kaplan himself in some of the statements he's made regarding a system like this. The reason for this, of course, being that DPS players far outweigh tank and support players. But I think the most concerning aspect of this is that many players might simply quit the game altogether if it reaches the point where they have to wait that long just to play a match. It is possible that many of these DPS players would actually end up converting to tank or support mains, albeit as the result of being forced to either convert or quit, which isn't an ultimatum I'm particularly a fan of, but in the long run, it could end up balancing itself out over time. There'd just be a lot of really bad growing pains, which honestly might end up doing more bad for the game than good at this point in Overwatch's life. But let's pretend that implementing this system doesn't cause DPS players to outright conduct a mass exodus, and instead a fair enough portion of them convert to play predominantly tank or support heroes, and the player base achieves some level of balance. That would be a good thing, right? Well, then we'd have to consider the fact that the tank and support classes combined have less hero options than DPS. This means that players who are now getting pigeonholed into one of these two smaller categories will now be forced with an even more restricted pool of options, as they are unable to swap to someone outside of their designated role. This would actually have the greatest impact on the existing flex players in Overwatch, as a forced role lock would now encourage them to specialize into one of the three classes. Let's say that you're great as both Reinhardt and Ana. You have to decide now which of these two heroes you're going to play before even getting to see the map or teammates you'll be working with that round, with no ability to then work with your team to flex outside of whichever role you selected. If you're mostly skilled in just one of the hero classes, then this will be much less of a problem, but overall, introducing a role lock will discourage the flex playstyle, as it'll become far more beneficial to specialize into a single role if you want to rank up. Overall, this could reduce the number of heroes any given player gets to play and enjoy, which, in combination with the small tank and support pools, could lead many players to become fatigued by the game much more quickly due to the lack of gameplay options. As you can see, there are some big pros and cons to weigh with regards to whether a 2-2-2 role lock would really work and benefit the game. The Overwatch devs have acknowledged that they've long been contemplating internally whether or not they want to go through with a change like this, and it's easy to see why. I would not be surprised if they regularly sit down together and discuss some of the exact points I've brought up here in this video, since if anyone's able to see the pros and cons of a huge change like this, it would, of course, be the devs themselves. But now that I've covered the major pros and cons, what is my final verdict? Is it a worthwhile system to introduce? Overall, I think I have to say yes. The benefit of being able to better balance the game under a 2-2-2 structure offers so much potential that personally I'm willing to just go for it and see how things could be improved. In terms of fixing Overwatch's janky competitive system, a role lock would undoubtedly do wonders. Again, it won't fix everything and will definitely introduce some new problems of its own, but overall I think it'll be a massively positive impact on the competitive scene. As for quick play, I think that it too will undergo whatever changes end up happening to competitive. It is designed to be a casual version of the competitive rule set, so I think it only makes sense for it to adopt the role lock as well. I think that this would also be pretty much mandatory if Blizzard started balancing heroes around the 2-2-2 structure, as otherwise it'd create a huge discrepancy in how the two modes play, and overall undermine the beneficial balance potential of the whole system. So if competitive ends up getting role lock, quick play almost certainly will too. If this whole system ends up going through, however, the one thing I will say is that there will for sure be a lot of growing pains. The transition will probably suck at first if I'm totally honest, and it will definitely take some time before players get used to this new system. Plus, it'll likely take a good bit of time after the system is introduced before we'll even really start seeing hero balance changes made to work with it. It's going to be a rough few months at first when it's introduced, and I guarantee you that many players will jump ship during it. But if it works out, then the end result could easily be the best state Overwatch has ever been in. And the sooner they make this change, the better. The only reason I think they might want to wait a bit would be to first try and flesh out the tank and support roles a bit more, so as to give players in those categories more options. But the transition will be tough no matter what, so the sooner we can get it over with, the better. Despite how massive and controversial the change is, I'm pretty optimistic for it playing out well in the end. I can easily see a time in the future where we all think back to the days before role lock, remember it being some kind of insane, lawless wasteland, much like how people nowadays remember Overwatch before hero limits. Anyways, these have just been my thoughts on Overwatch getting a forced 2-2-2 role lock, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Perhaps you have a slightly different perspective on the pros and cons of implementing a system like this, or even have your own ideas about how it could be improved. Either way though, be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and share it with a friend if you really liked it. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and hit up the bell to never miss any of my future Overwatch content. This is Master Eon Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.